Hi, everyone, and welcome to the virtual event, South Asian Roots of Borderless Hate Economy, How Content Farms Monetize Islamophobia and Anti-Migrant Hate for Export to the UK, Europe, and North America. My name is Avian Leidig, and I'm the Director of Research and Outreach at the Center for the Study of Organized Hate, and I'm pleased to be moderating today's virtual event. The Center for the Study of Organized Hate, or CSOH, is a think tank focused on understanding, preventing, and combating the multifaceted phenomena of organized hate. We conduct research on hate, violence, extremism, radicalism, and associated online harms geared towards policy advocacy and public engagement. Joining us today to discuss the growing role of commercial networks in monetization are three esteemed panelists. The first, Miriam Madhi, is a Tunisian investigative reporter specializing in tech, disinformation, and online abuse. She was an Aziz Fellow at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, where she contributed to reporting that uncovered the network of Sri Lanka-based Facebook pages spreading anti-migrant and anti-government content to UK audiences. She has worked in the private sector as a digital analyst and OSCENT investigator looking into state-led influence operations. Our second speaker, Sid Ramakrishnan, is an analyst and editorial manager at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. His role includes both overseeing the quality across both public and confidential outputs and analyzing a range of topics, including anti-South Asian hate, misinformation related to the financial system, and anti-migrant discourse. And finally, Victoire Rio is the founder and executive director of What to Fix, a tech policy and accountability nonprofit and a leading expert on social media monetization and its impact on information integrity. Prior to founding What to Fix to address systemic risks associated with social media, Victoire spent 8 years leading tech accountability efforts in Myanmar, where she co-founded and led the Myanmar Tech Accountability Network. So we'll allow each panelist to offer their opening remarks before we turn to a discussion between all of them. And also we will have the opportunity for those joining us today to send in your questions into the Q&A following our discussion. So please feel free to use the Q&A function to have your question for our panelists, which I will collate towards the end. But first, I want to start off with Miriam. So Miriam, TBIJ's investigation has uncovered anti-immigrant disinformation targeting far-right audiences in the UK, which originates from commercially motivated networks in Sri Lanka. Could you share some insights from your findings of that investigation and explain what prompted it?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks to CSOH for inviting me, and thanks to those who joined us today. Last November, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism published an investigation alongside the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and the Times newspaper after we found a network of around 128 Facebook pages and groups that were run from Sri Lanka but were targeting UK audiences. The network had a combined following of around 1.6 million, and through research we were able to identify one individual in particular that was behind a small part of the network, but had actually started making money by teaching others online how to monetize via Facebook's in-streams ad service. His name is Geeth Suryapura. On his social media profiles, he shows off a very lavish lifestyle, expensive watches, 5-star hotels, an apartment with a pool, and he claims to have made $300,000 from running Facebook pages that push racist, Islamophobic, and anti-migrant content aimed at British audiences, primarily. He calls himself the Facebook Ads King, and he runs an academy, a paid training program where He coaches students to build Facebook pages and monetize them through Meta's in-stream ads program. These are the short ads that appear while we scroll through Reels on Facebook, and they are ads that generate revenue for the creator every time that they are viewed. So Meta does not publicly disclose how many people are generating revenue from their in-stream ads service. However, according to one of the latest figures, although I think, Victoire will be able to give us a better data on this. I think as of 2024, they stated publicly that 4 million users were using monetization tools on Facebook. So when we first found the YouTube channel of Geet Suryapura, I'd say it was a major turning point for the investigation, and it was also so incredibly powerful to see someone who belongs to a racialized ethnic group live stream himself as he publishes the most xenophobic content on Facebook, and just showing other people in his same situation how to do the same, and showing how much money he was making from it. I think that what really struck me and stayed with me till this day is the massive contrast between what he called niches. So he wasn't just teaching his students how to monetize via racist and Islamophobic content. It was racism and kittens, racism and Italian food, racism and wildlife, landscapes, nails and arts, and this huge contrast between such a horrible ideology and violent ideology, and something like as innocent as kittens, really goes to show how, in the end, it is about money making for these people. It is about getting some financial relief. Just 1 year before the investigation into Geet Suryapura, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism published another investigation on this topic, in which we revealed that a network of Nigerian hackers was using the same rhetoric and the same hateful speech to sell a variety, and that includes anti-Black hateful speech. And they were using this to sell crypto betting scams, basically. And in the same investigation, we looked into drop shipping e-commerces based in Vietnam, India, and the Philippines, selling MAGA merchandise and other types of merch containing extremely xenophobic content. And if I'm not wrong, when this investigation came out, it was also the same time in which the Associated Press revealed that Trump's Bible is being printed in China. So this really goes to show the major cognitive dissonance of this whole sector, of this new way of making money. And as much as the people behind these businesses claim to have no ill intent, because we did manage to get on a video call with Geet Suryapura, we have seen what happened in Belfast in the UK just 2 weeks ago. The people who are fed this type of content have no digital resilience whatsoever. They are exposed to a dangerous cocktail of presidents who delegitimize the press. And when you do that, people need to know what's happening in the world. So when you delegitimize the press, you're directing people towards other sources of information, in this case, disinformation. We have quite a loosely regulated tech sector. And then there's a worsening of the financial situation of all these people who are being fed this type of content. So even when it comes to finding a solution, there needs to be cooperation between governmental bodies when it comes to addressing the situation. Because it's not purely about tech policy, really, and tech regulators. When we got hold of Geet Suryapura on a video call, he he said, we just educate people on monetization and audience targeting. But then a few minutes later, he literally said to us, we target older British people because they are the ones who don't like immigrants. They are the ones who don't like Sri Lankans, and they are the ones who don't like Indians. And so it's just easier to make money off of them, basically. And yeah, those were some of the major findings of the investigation. And what prompted it, I would say, I personally grew up and I decided I wanted to become a journalist at the same time in which people were starting to, were using Facebook 10, 15 years ago, 20, out of ideology. It was pure ideological drive. People, yes, sometimes they did spread disinformation willingly or unwillingly, but you could sense the human behind the content. But when it comes to this type of content, really all we had to do was come across it, and it's very easy, this is very algorithm friendly content. Come across it, one of the posts contains a grammatical error, and then suddenly you find 20 or 30 or 40 other pages that publish posts that contain that same grammatical error, the same emojis, the same exact phrases. And you just ask yourself, like, nobody's doing this out of ideology. Like, there must be a money-making strategy behind this, because not even the most passionately hateful individual in the world would probably pour that much time into doing this. And yeah, those are the questions we asked ourselves when we started to look into this.
Thanks so much, Miriam, for setting a really strong foundation for our discussion today. I'm going to turn now to Sid. So Sid, based on your research, how do you analyze the trend of AI-generated content produced by networks and actors in South Asia, amplifying far-right rhetoric, Islamophobia, and anti-migrant narratives in Europe, North America, and beyond? And how does this large-scale commercialization of disinformation impact the broader online information ecosystem?
Thanks so much, Vivian, and thank you, Mary. You covered a lot of the points. So to set the foundation and cover the points, what I was going to lead off to, so I'll try and build off that. I think that it's just remarkable the pace at which this has grown. I think both in terms of monetization, but also AI being able to generate images which are powerful and evocative. And I think that that's what, although you still find a lot of these accounts who are promoting anti-migrant and anti-Muslim hate are sometimes stealing photos or images from other pages because they see something popular elsewhere. What you've seen is that using generative AI to create images which are either hyper-realistic or there are some caricatures, there are realistic images, there are also symbolic images, I suppose, as a category, which are quite potent images of soldiers guarding a border, or a video of ICE agents, British ICE agents, should you have British ICE agents appearing there? So the ability to do that at scale has definitely impacted the information ecosystem. And I think what's noteworthy is how it's been adopted by both these actors, but also by actors in other countries who are genuinely engaging with this content because they believe in it. So around the start of this year, you had a campaign around Amelia, who was basically a pin-up doll of the internet far right, based on a counter-extremist meme or game produced by the by someone in the government here in the UK. What was fascinating was how much you saw AI-generated images of Amelia spreading everywhere by accounts based in the US and Europe and the UK, and sort of the whole information ecosystem becoming tarred and mixed up and polluted with AI-generated content. So I think there's certainly a line between genuine politics and commercialized politics, and I think it is being deliberately blurred by a lot of these actors. I'd say that Another thing which I've been seeing is fascinating how many accounts who are based in Muslim countries I've been seeing are promoting this content, very explicitly anti-Muslim content. So I've been looking at a network of groups in Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are getting hundreds of thousands of likes. Or sorry, they have hundreds of thousands of members in their groups. They're getting hundreds or even thousands of likes and clicks there on content saying, should the burqa be banned? Should halal meat be banned? Deliberately controversial images saying of Muslims holding up signs saying, I don't want to leave the country, where all the people are saying, yes, it's good, you should leave the country, self-deport, remigration, things like this. And what's concerning is one, the level of engagement, but also that you're seeing people like a quite prominent sovereign citizen going into that group and posting content there. Now, one thing I've been wondering is whether the people who are engaging with content genuinely know if it's misleading, because you have some cases where the person who owns the group is being identified as being from a Muslim country and being attacked, but the same people will post in the group as well. So you have this weird cognitive dissonance emerging, which I think somewhat, it doesn't really matter fundamentally whether the group is set up for commercial purposes or not. It is just still very powerful to people there and sort of speaks to an authenticity which is deeper than reality in a sense. And certainly, as you alluded to at the start, in terms of the UK, we've obviously seen really marked anti-migrant mobilization, and this has been a factor of the last well, since 2024 onwards, really. This has become a repeated factor, unfortunately, in the UK, particularly during the summer, where specific incidents involving migrants or those who are perceived as migrantized, essentially non-white communities, are targeted as a result of attacks by basically non-white individuals. So we saw in Southampton the murder there, leading to attacks or targeted hate against particularly Sikh communities. And in Belfast, we saw migrant communities as a whole being targeted and calls for mass deportations targeting them. And these accounts on Facebook aren't necessarily always pushing, they're not necessarily always the most on the ball because the content is more generalized anti-migrant hate, but certainly they create a atmosphere which is more permissive to this. And I think helps to legitimize it. If you go in a group with 100,000 people and you're seeing several thousand people saying, yes, it's good, deport Muslims, then I suspect that probably buoys you and legitimizes that opinion. I'd say South Asia isn't the only area, and I think it's fascinating how much this has grown. Obviously, Nigeria, as Miriam was saying, Vietnam, there are a lot of networks targeting often the US, but also increasingly the UK. And I've seen at least one UK network involved. And I think, again, the line between genuine belief and pure commercial motive is becoming so blurred in these accounts, where, I mean, the person running the UK network I know is I think an Albanian Muslim who lives in just outside London. He's basically identified himself through his company's house. But, you know, he posts all this extremely strong anti-Muslim content whilst having I think a mosque as his profile picture. You know, it's this very strange cognitive dissonance which emerges here, even in the British setting. But even there, he is trying to monetize it. And I've seen him posting in content monetization groups complaining that not enough people are clicking through to his website, trying to funnel people off Facebook to get more money through banner ads. I think one thing which Miriam touched on, and I would just again say is what's fascinating is how quickly these groups can reorientate themselves. So one of the Sri Lankan network groups was like a time capsule. You had layers. You started off with generic British posts, just people holding flags or going to protests or going to rallies, all AI generated. You had the sort of before and after of London generated with AI. And then it steadily moved on, and then it became anti-migrant hate, because obviously that was what was working. And I think it's really notable how groups are able to shift over time and really pick up new trends. So, for example, there was a lot of content supporting Reform UK previously, and I'm just emphasizing, I don't think this is Reform UK has paid for this. This is just commercial activity. But there's been a shift towards Restore Britain, as Restore Britain has become more salient in public imagination. So I think these groups are capable of retargeting themselves quite effectively at both to glom onto new politics and new political parties, but also to find new targets, but they're Muslims, migrants, or other groups. And time, just what I'd say is two factors quickly after that is one is around broad ecosystems and looking at other platforms. So, for example, on X, I've been seeing a network of primarily South Asian accounts producing non-consensual intimate images of celebrities. And it's usually the same 3 or 4 celebrities, so I'm pretty sure it's a network. I think it fits within that same category. I don't think it's as slick as we saw in the Sri Lankan network, but again, it's the idea of creating content that is highly provocative, that's highly controversial, that gets people to click through. And obviously, sexual titillation is quite different in some ways to anti-migrant hate, but again, the fundamental idea is that the harm is less important than the commercialization. And just finally, I'll say on financial misinformation fraud side, I think we are seeing a increasing overlap between fraud and scams and misinformation as a whole, both as vectors to sell it, but also in terms of narratives. So we saw there was these ads involving Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey being either beaten up or threatened with a gun by Nigel Farage, which all pointed to investment scams. But the narratives that came through there were really strong anti-establishment messages, which really echoed a lot of what we saw in the Sri Lankan and other networks. The claim that the elite, the establishment, the police are against you. You need to prepare yourself for them, and obviously with a strong anti-migrant bias. And in the Sri Lankan network, we saw a lot of "hello, darling" messages in the comment section. So messages saying, "Hello, darling, can I talk to you?" or words to that effect, which is basically the start of a romance or perhaps investment scam. So I think one thing I would definitely consider is that although one way of monetizing is through just through clicks and through engagement, another aspect is that people who are selling scams are trying to move more into the misinformation space. People who are selling misinformation are pushing forward scams. And as these two worlds collide, if you are engaging with audiences who have limited media literacy, and as Miriam was saying, are already in financially stressed situations, that the likelihood of potentially going into dodgy investments or being driven down romance scams with fake Elon Musks, as often seems to be the case, is increasingly concerning. So I'll just end that there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sid, especially for pointing out, I think also the opportunism driving a lot of this activity, as well as some very interesting examples concerning the contradictory nature of the creators of this content and the actual content that is being produced. So now I want to turn to Victoire to talk about how does the platform design and policies on monetization specifically incentivize the production of hate speech and disinformation? And what are the primary hurdles in seeking tech accountability and enforcing monetization governance?
Thanks so much, Evian, and thank you so much, Miriam and Sid, for setting such a strong foundation. It's an issue I've been looking at now since 2018, primarily, well, originally in the context of Myanmar and sort of research around the Rohingya genocide and the coup afterwards, and it's sort of only grown. And as Sid mentioned, it's a growing problem. So it's definitely I'm grateful that we get the opportunity to talk about this more. But to your question, Evian, how do platforms incentivize the production of hate and disinformation? I think the most important thing to understand here is that most monetization programs today base their payouts on engagement. So essentially, the more engagement you get, the more money you get. And when it comes to hate and disinformation, this plays out in, I guess, a couple ways. On the one hand, when we look at influencers, this creates an incentive for influencers to lean into controversies. So that's making hateful comments, engaging with rumors, because that's a sure way to get engagement. But what Miriam and Sid were describing are not influencers so much as faceless accounts. And when it comes to those faceless accounts, I think the incentive is a little bit different. For them, the surest path to engagement is scale and automation. And so the more accounts they have, the more content they post, the more they produce content for markets that pay well or for topics that generate high engagement, the more money they can make. And so in most cases, what we find, and I think Miriam and Sid did a really good job of kind of covering that, is that these actors are totally agnostic to the situation they're engaging in. And in some cases, they actually don't even speak the language. They're just essentially doing what we kind of call engagement farming, right? And we have seen a major boom in the last few years, in part, as Sid mentioned, fueled by AI, because generative AI is helping produce content at scale. It's also helping produce content that's optimized to generate engagement. But it's also actually helping these actors detect peak of engagement and be able to kind of capitalize on those peak of engagement wherever they may be in the word. But it's not just about AI. And I think the thing that is really key, in my opinion, to understand is how it connects to the maturation of an automation industry that is particularly developed in Asia, where it's never been easier to buy. Fake account is one thing, but you can now buy software, hardware. In fact, you can actually get hardware as a service and access running accounts that are actually in Hanoi that you're accessing from your laptop and renting by the hour to run an operation. So what we find is it's really become very, very cheap, and the availability of those services are not just cheap, they're easy to find. You can get them directly. You can access them on Telegram. You can access them and find them on TikTok, on Facebook. You can find them everywhere. And you can find a ton of training courses, because a lot of people that have been in the space for some time are now realizing that they can also make a fair amount of money by running courses. So you have that sort of throughout. But I guess that leaves us with sort of the question of the role of the platform. What's the role of the platforms here? And in my opinion, platforms are at the core and at the center of the issue. It's not AI that's creating this problem. It's the incentive that platforms are actually creating. And this is really a take accountability issue at its core. Insofar as, many of these accounts will not exist or post this content if it wasn't for the money that they are making from platforms. Now, I don't think the problem is about monetization policies of platform. In many cases, actually, these policies are pretty good at identifying what the risks might be. The real problem is with enforcement of these policies, right? At my organization, What to Fix, we've been backing up the disclosures that Meta does. So Meta actually releases lists roughly every day, not quite, of the accounts that are currently in their program. It's a little annoying because you can only see who is today in the program. And so if an account was there yesterday but got kicked out, you can't see it. And so for the last 7 years, as part of my coffee routine in the morning, I've been downloading this data. And about a year ago now, we released what we call the Meta Monetization Archive. So it's on a website called monetization.wtf. And what we now have is a dashboard that lets you look through what are all the accounts that have been monetizing, and then for each account, what has been their timeline of monetization across different programs. And when we look at this big picture, and I'm saying big because we've just reached 3 billion entries in this archive, which is making it a very difficult task to continue to maintain. But when we look at it all together, what we actually get is a really pretty, a solid picture of what is really kind of a reckless rollout by Meta of those monetization services. The numbers have exploded since 2024. Just to give you a sense of scale, when it comes to accounts monetizing from Facebook, we've seen an increase of 850% in just the last 2 years, right? So we've gone from 1.9 million to nearly 16 today. And just 4 days ago, Meta launched a monetization challenge promising to send invitation to its content monetization program to any account that reaches 300,000 views in the next 30 days. That's a major drop in the entry requirements, where accounts were previously required to have a minimum of 5,000 followers and to have even more views than that. So we're now seeing sort of a big drop in requirement. I'm very curious to see how many more accounts the platform are going to be inviting into this program. They say that it's okay because they have onboarding processes and they are reviewing who gets access. Now, what our research building on this Meta Monetization Archive has shown is that they're consistently failing to follow their own monetization policies, right? I mean, we found them, and we continue to find them, in fact, onboarding entities under sanctions. They have policies that say that political actors should not be allowed to monetize. We found thousands of politicians, political parties. the Ministry of Communication of Cambodia, which is supposed to regulate them. Just on and on and on. And if we look at Asia, Southeast, South Asia, we see not only a lot of politicians, but also a lot of police units, military units that are making use of this program. And then, of course, a ton and ton and ton of accounts that should have triggered sort of heightened due diligence because they're very clearly posting solely AI-generated content for the purpose of monetizing. We see a lot of accounts that are mismatched between the location of the admins and the kind of the language being targeted. So we talk a lot about the UK, which is an easy market because it's in English language, which is widely spoken in South Asia. But we see a ton of accounts from Vietnam and Indonesia popping up in Hungarian language or in languages that I don't believe these people have any kind of conscious knowledge of, right? Which is where AI generation kind of kicks in. So we're seeing them routinely onboard this. And that kind of leaves us with the question of why is it that this is happening, right? Why are platforms not doing their job at enforcing their monetization policies? Why are they not doing more to prevent hate and disinformation from being incentivized and financed through their services? Again, it's not a new issue, right? I've personally been raising this issue in the context of the Rohingya genocide 7-8 years ago now. So it's something that they're familiar with, that they've heard about it. It's not new. We've had this conversation over and over again. And I guess the short answer here is it's their business model. It goes with the business model, right? So if you go back in time, if you look at the bigger picture, right? Social media platforms, clients are not us as their users. The clients are advertisers. And if they are to continue to deliver double-digit growth year after year to their investors the way they have, they need to be able to sell more ads. And so if we look back, originally, there were only a few spots where platforms could sell ads. When they had a homepage, they could put ad in the banner on the side, maybe at the top, maybe at the bottom, but there was quite a bit of a limitation as to how many ads were sellable. And then they had the magic invention of the newsfeed, which was fantastic because people started scrolling. If people scroll, they see more content, you can place more ads. That was great, but they eventually run into a wall, right? You can only put so many ads inside a newsfeed before people get fed up with your platform. And so then they had the brilliant idea that, well, what if we start, now that people are posting videos, what if we start putting videos inside putting ads inside user-generated content, which is where sort of we started to see this big boom of a lot of those partner-publisher partnerships, which is what they call them. I guess now we're getting kind of more used to seeing ads everywhere, including on videos. So we're kind of about to see the next iteration here, where platforms are actually now moving to the next phase in their kind of ad grabbing strategy, which is to say, actually, those ads, those videos, that user-generated videos that are on our platforms, they're on our servers. So maybe we should just grant ourselves the right to monetize the ads and not need the consent of publishers anymore, which is essentially what YouTube has done and other platforms are now starting to do, which, and I'm probably going to leave it here, but I think this is the thing that I'm the most concerned about, because what we've seen over the last few years, and in particular the last couple of years, is platforms really, really pushing for more and more people to become partner publishers, to start building an infrastructure of faceless account, to pay for automation, to set a whole infrastructure. And, you know, it's one thing, like, of course, this is already harmful and we need them to stop, and we need them to stop paying. But I think it would be naive to think that the minute they stop paying, that these accounts are going to disappear. We now have millions of people across Asia predominantly, but yes, indeed, increasingly across Africa and other parts of the world, that have hundreds of accounts, that have software that allows them to manage these hundreds of accounts and automatically identify topics that are influential and generate content for this. This infrastructure that they've invested in, I don't think it's going to disappear. And this is where I actually will meet Sid on this point around the connection with scam. Is I think we need to stop the money and we need to stop the incentive, but we also very much need to start to think about how we're going to be disarming this infrastructure so that those people don't start to think about other ways that they could be monetizing those accounts and automation software. Because the risk otherwise is that we're going to find ourselves with a massive increase in both scam and disinformation for hire in the couple of years to come.
Thanks very much, Victoire, for also painting the much broader picture in which we see these patterns and trends unfolding. We already have several questions that are starting to come in from our audience, which is great. I will take one question here, which is, why is this online activity, as we've discussed with these different examples and case studies, why is this online activity aiming to promote far-right and anti-migrant content specifically? And why not perhaps other types of, say, ideological content? And I think, Sid, you started to discuss this a bit in your response. Perhaps you'd like to take this question, but also anyone is welcome to.
Happy to start us off there. Actually, it's really interesting because one of the Sri Lankan accounts I remember, or pages rather, it was mostly political anti-migrant content. And then out of the blue, there was one post of a man holding a banner saying "Migrants welcome," and the response was highly negative there. I think part of it is A/B testing. Part of it is probably a lack of understanding over what some of the text there. So I think it is a combination of the fact that this content is highly controversial and gets clicks regardless and gets engagement. And you'll often find even people who are negative on this content will probably engage with this perhaps more than other political content. But also, as Miriam was saying, this is part of a broad ecosystem where you have great animal facts, which will also be run by the same person who does, get all the migrants out group. So it really is a combination of hate, which is highly controversial, but also just generic content which gets click-throughs. I think you even see that in the advertising. A lot of these accounts had the same ad which featured a puppy with a ladybug on its nose, which is very cute. And obviously people click on that and then they end up on this group. And actually that was a tactic which was used quite a few years ago by Britain First, which is a far-right party in the UK. So you really have this interesting overlap where the same tactics are being adopted by actors spreading the same messages, but for entirely different purposes. So I think in response to the question, this content is highly controversial, so you get clicks on both sides of the political spectrum, but also it's part of a broad ecosystem where any content that can sell will also be shoved in there.
Thanks, Sid. Miriam or Victoire, would you like to add anything to Sid's point?
I agree with Sid. I mean, outrage really is very algorithm friendly. And I'd like to add that when we were investigating the e-commerces, the dropshipping businesses based in Vietnam and other parts of Asia, we noticed that many of the stores had mostly MAGA merchandise, but some of them, like we could see them day by day, also creating pages that were in favor of the Democrats and of Kamala Harris. And so again, I agree with Sid, it's a lot also about trial and error and see what works with audiences and what drives more engagement.
I think the earliest example sort of this kind of behavior was during the 2016 election, a whole bunch of teenagers in Northern Macedonia, who had realized that actually running Trump content was far more engaging than running Hillary content, right? And so there was, for a while, the sense that there was a massive boost from the Trump campaign, but it just happened to be the type of content that paid better because it's way more engaging to talk about controversial statement than it is to engage with sort of policy discussions. And I think we see this now repeated on a broader scale.
Now, the next question we have is about the role, reach, and relevance of AI. And I know that is something that has already been mentioned by all of you. But the question specifically, I think, is sort of trying to understand, given the fact that there's just so much exponential growth in the capabilities of AI, and the generation of material through monetization, A/B testing, hyper local targeting, localization, et cetera, how do you actually see AI feeding into these processes? Victoire, please go ahead.
I'm happy to take it. I mean, I think, look, I think AI is now increasingly being integrated with automation services, which is, so it started with sort of being able to auto-generate text-based content, now being sort of, so if you sort of look at what a software to automate the management of accounts looks like, it's essentially a database of all of your accounts that you can then group and give tasks to following a specific script, right? So you could say, I'm now managing 1,000 account, and those like, I don't know, certain accounts are going to go and do this and this and the steps and whatnot. It's been around for a while, but I think AI is now increasing the capacities of these tools, and we still haven't reached sort of yet the threshold where video content is heavily being produced there, but I don't think we're very far. Now, the point I wanted to make, which is maybe not a direct answer to the question, but what strikes me as problematic is that the whole conversation about AI looks at AI labeling. How do we detect AI level content? How do we deal with the impact of AI content? But there hasn't been a discussion at all about why are we dealing with so much AI content in the first place? And so when you look at the regulatory conversation, the whole discussion around monetization incentive is not part of the discussion. And so in a way, it's like, well, so we're complaining that we're building so many data centers, and that's a huge issue. We need to regulate this. But could we not like reduce the need of data center by about 50% if we dealt with the actual like abuse of AI for creating content by nobody for nobody that no one actually wants there in the first place? Like there is a real kind of gap there in the regulatory conversation. And to me, that's where we should be paying a lot more attention.
Yeah, thanks, Victoire. I did actually want to turn to a discussion about some of these regulatory frameworks, but before we do so, I just want to offer Sid or Miriam an opportunity to address this question about AI if they would like.
I'll just jump in to say that Victoire's content for nobody by nobody is such a great way of putting it, and it's so, and obviously this is, there is appearing everywhere on every platform. So I think that's a lovely way to talk about it. I think what was really interesting was, again, and seeing this from a overlap perspective, the use of AI-generated imagery around the Belfast riots, which is being generated primarily by genuine accounts, or genuine is probably the wrong word, but by far-right or anti-migrant accounts based in the UK or abroad. A lot of it mirrored the same kind of cartoon style being generated by these Sri Lankan or South Asian accounts around other anti-migrant hate. So I think it is, again, it's become such an endemic tool across the space that it's really, yeah, again, I suppose coming back to the point that genuine misinformation, quote unquote, and commercial misinformation are becoming so entirely intertwined, and just being able to produce content at scale rapidly just allows it to spread so much faster.
Yeah, I suppose also with that additional layer of political misinformation too, it all gets quite bundled up there. Miriam, would you like to add anything at this point, or we can move on to the next question?
I agree with Sid and Victoire. I mean, especially with what Victoire said, like there's a lot of focus on how to detect these technologies, but nobody's asking why there's so much of it in the first place. And that's true. I mean, we see it even before the use of AI was so widespread. People were still finding ways to do, creative graphics to use to spread this sort of hateful comment. And that's, I think, the type of behavior that needs to be studied.
Thank you, Miriam. So we have quite a lot of questions here that really focus on this theme of, what steps can we take, what can be done to help to combat the prevalence of these commercial networks as well as associated digital harms therein. I think, some people are asking, what specifically can those in the human rights or digital rights space do? What steps can courts take in terms of a legal approach? And so I would like to open this up to all of our panelists to address, maybe from their own individual perspective, the steps that can be taken to help address this. And to complicate it further, though, I also want to bring in a conversation about existing regulatory frameworks like the DSA in the EU and the OSA in the UK, and how we can also perhaps effectively leverage these regulatory regimes to address these challenges as well. But feel free to address this question from whichever perspective you'd like, and also the types of institutional responses that you think are warranted in this case. So it's open to whoever would like to go first.
I'm happy to take that. It's definitely been a question that's been at the core of our work for the last few years, looking at what do we do to tackle this problem. I want to start though by I guess one of the things that frustrates me in addressing this problem of monetization, of this kind of two big things that I think are important to understand if we're going to be able to address this. The first thing is monetization systems, so monetization terms, policies, enforcement processes are no longer connected to advertising systems in the way that platforms operate. And that's really critical because the entire regulation in the EU is written around this understanding that platforms act as ad intermediary. In the way that currently platform functions, they have advertising terms, policies, and enforcement mechanism dealing with advertisers, and then they have monetization terms, monetization policies, monetization enforcement processes dealing with content creators and publishers. And those two things are completely disconnected. They're not intermediaries anymore. They're actually paying content royalties to creators. And that creates a big challenge in the way that the DSA is approaching this issue, because it all kind of is based on this understanding that platforms, or that it deals with ad intermediaries, which platforms are saying they no longer are, and in the way that they've redesigned the system, they no longer actually act as such. So that's one thing that I think has been kind of a challenging thing. And then the second thing, I've lost my point now, but okay, I'll come back to it in a sec, maybe if someone else wants to come in.
Yeah, sure. We can come back to you, Victoire. Sid?
Yeah, I was going to quickly hop on my I guess obviously hateful content. This is content which is prohibited under legislative frameworks like the DSA, and I know hate speech is obviously depends on the country, and content, for example, banned in some member states like Germany but won't be banned in others. One angle I've been thinking of in a slightly different legislative framework is around more on the scam side and fraudulent content, is that there's a lot of focus in the UK on sorry, close the door before everyone hears the sound. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries, Sid. I don't think we even heard very much of what's going on, I guess.
Sorry.
Yeah, it comes back.
Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say very quickly that I think that in the UK, the onus for refunding scams is on banks at the moment. And this has been a long-standing discussion around whether tech companies and telcos should pay some of the cost for this. And I suspect that given that the fraud, scam, misinformation, commercial misinformation space is overlapping, I think one area to consider is whether putting some of the burden on the places where the scams first emerge might cut down some of the incentives on the platform side or increase the incentive for platforms to tackle this, but also to impact these networks and potentially disrupt them somewhat.
Thanks. Did you remember your point, Victoire?
I did. Yeah. Sorry. No, so sort of back to this point around the division between advertising and monetization being separate. I think it's also part of the problem is that this issue is being approached from a content lens, when what we're actually dealing with is business relationships. And there's a whole lot of laws and regulation that applies to business relationship. And platforms have essentially been able to avoid that by saying, but don't worry, basically the only people they've been afraid of so far are advertisers. And they've said to advertisers, don't worry, we are going to be applying brand safety and a content adjacency framework. What this means in simple term is we're going to deal with this problem with a bunch of classifiers that we all know don't work for content moderation, but now we're going to get them to make decisions about money. When at the same time, they're getting into business with literally millions of people. And not enforcing any of the KYC that they're actually supposed to be compelled to, right? It's kind of like a bank saying, we'll let anybody that wants to open an account, open a bank account in our services, and actually we'll give them free money every month. But don't you worry, because we have classifiers checking all financial transactions, and if we detect sufficient amount of them that are illegal, then maybe we will ban them. That's kind of essentially the framework we're in here. And I think we need to kind of shift back the conversation to this being not a content issue. This is purely a business relationship issue. In the same way that the advertisers that they engage with are a business relationship, the creators and publishers they engage with are a business relationship. And I think we need to kind of start really doing that, because a lot of what we've been focused on, so yes, the DSA, the DMA, OSI, like this are regulation that in some ways could, through their risk management framework, address some of the issue. But they're very slow moving, and they're not going to do very much apart from getting platforms to acknowledge that there's a risk and to mention some risk mitigation that may not work. But meanwhile, actually, what we're finding is platforms are onboarding sanction entities. They are facilitating payments to political parties during election campaign. A whole lot of stuff that is already illegal.
Question, and I mean, there's so many tools nowadays that allow you to do this type of investigations. You know, I think Bellingcat have collated a list of OSINT tools that's very useful. There's also another company called Indicator that have collated all of the OSINT tools lists together and built one that you can use. That you can search by using LLM prompts. So anything you need, you know, you need to analyze the followers lists of a certain Facebook page or anything like that. You can just type it in the search bar and it will give you the right tool for that. And again, there's new tools being developed every day for this type of investigations. I would say, like, the best tool is probably the fact that the people running these operations are human, so they're going to make mistakes, and you have to, you know, you need to have a sharp eye in order to identify them and see if these mistakes have been repeated across other pages. Unfortunately, Meta has pulled very important tools like CrowdTangle that previously allowed us to search for networks trying to influence elections or disinformation networks for in general very easily. Now they're not there anymore, so I would say manual searches and intuition, you know, are the best tools when it comes to this type of investigations. If you want to preserve evidence, then I would suggest tools like Hunchly. There's a free version of it. The Wayback Machine is really great if you are investigating X accounts. You will find historical versions of X accounts on the Wayback Machine. And yeah, those are the main ones, you know, I use. Really, there's nothing special.
Regardless, it's good to inform those interested in wanting to learn more about the different tools and resources that they can use to then start to collect this evidence base for their work. Well, before we wrap up, I just wanted to give our panelists as well the opportunity to add any closing thoughts that they might have that perhaps we didn't address in our discussion today. Maybe I'll hand it to Sid first.
Yeah, no, I think that, as Miriam said, actually that point on people make mistakes, and that's something which is a positive, is that I think in all these spaces, the one hope is that there are giveaways, and that whether that's the country they're from doesn't match up to where they claim to be. If you look through old photos, you'll find random pictures from, I saw one, the Bangladeshi network, some Arabic text there, or pictures of their kids, which I was reminded that they're real people doing this who are entirely divorced from the harm that it does to other real people, which is quite concerning, or at least depressing. But I think that my main, I guess, wrap up would be that we should see these networks as something that will continue to expand and continue to find new ways to target us until platforms effectively stop the incentives. And at the moment, the incentive to stop the incentives is not strong enough.
Thanks, Sid. Miriam or Victoire?
Just building on what Miriam shared, just encourage people to make use of this monetization.wtf website that we have, which is a growing a transparency repository on sort of the available information about existing programs across platform, and also where we have this meta monetization archive where you can actually run specific searches, either looking at a particular account and seeing whether that account has monetized and when and on what program, or also run queries for all the accounts that have monetized in a particular language or in a particular program or with a particular name. So it's also a very good tool to sort of explore the space of monetization. And we are currently in the process of putting together a masterclass on how to research monetization across services and what is it that you can prove. And because there's actually possibilities to prove even with platforms that don't have transparency. So if you look at a platform like YouTube, if an account has a channel subscription enabled, it actually demonstrates that that account was approved into the YouTube Partner Program. Not necessarily for all modules of it, but it does confirm that the account passed through YouTube's review, which gives you an element of information for then applying some tech accountability efforts in there. So we're kind of in the process of designing this course, and we have an expression of interest form up at the moment. I'm happy to put that in the chat if folks are interested.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, I think there would be quite a lot of interest. And Miriam, any last words on your end?
Yeah, so I just pasted in the chat some of the tools that I mentioned. I don't know if everyone can see them or just Sieda, who asked for them.
Oh, we can see them. Yes.
Okay, perfect. First of all, good luck to everyone who wants to undertake this sort of investigations on this topic. And please, if you have any questions about it, any doubts, you need any tips, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. And then just a few words to conclude. I don't think I have much to say in terms of the regulatory framework and the policy, because I don't have that academic background or experience. And I think Victoire and Sid covered it really well. And the work they do is really spectacular. And what I can say is that there needs to be more done in order to educate people and equip them with digital resilience. Every time I investigate this topic, I keep imagining, people, a certain, let's say, demographic sitting at home and scrolling their newsfeed and being fed these hateful lies. But I mean, this for them is not hateful lies. They're taking this, as if it's true, for granted. And that's how we end up seeing the horrible violence that we witnessed the past few weeks. I was gonna say as well, we need to prevent and equip younger generations with digital resilience, as if this hasn't already touched younger generations. But then I remember that here in the UK there is definitely a crisis in terms of young men being fed extremely misogynistic content that has resulted in real life harm. So this is now probably a disinformation crisis at all effects, and rather than just tech regulators, this needs an intergovernmental bodies approach in order to address this.
Thank you for offering that very humanizing perspective. Well, thank you to all the panelists and those joining us today for this really excellent and timely panel discussion. And there were links that were shared in the chat. Please do check them out. We hope that you'll continue to follow our work at CSOH. Please do subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn for the latest updates. Thank you all very much and take care. Bye, everybody.